Welcome to these stories of letting go. Tonight, as the old year draws quietly to a close, we gather here in this space of rest, this threshold between what was and what will be. There is no hurry here, no need to fix or achieve or become, only the gentle invitation to release what you have been carrying, to set it down softly, the way one places a stone by the side of a path after carrying it for miles. The year has asked much of you. It has brought moments of joy and moments of weight. It has given and it has taken. And now, as the final hours unfold, you need not count them or measure them. You need only breathe. Let your body soften into the surface beneath you. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. There is nothing left to do tonight except rest. In the Buddhist tradition, the end of a year is not a time of loud celebration, but of quiet reflection. It is a time to bow to what has passed, to honor the teachers both joyful and difficult that the year has been, and then, with empty hands and a clear heart, to step forward into what comes next. These stories tonight are offerings. They are small, simple tales of monks and villagers, wanderers and artisans, each finding their own way to let go. Listen without effort. Let the words wash over you like water. If you drift into sleep before the stories end, that is exactly right. Sleep is its own kind of release. So settle in now. Let your breathing slow. Let the world outside grow distant, and let us begin. There was a monk who lived in a small temple nestled high in the mountains, where the air was thin and the sky impossibly wide. His name was Daejo, and he had lived there for 30 years, tending the temple grounds, sweeping the stone paths, ringing the bronze bell at dawn and dusk. The temple was old, older than memory, and its wooden beams carried the scent of centuries' incense and rain and the slow sweetness of decay. On the last day of the year, Daejo woke before dawn, as he always did. The world outside was still wrapped in darkness, the stars sharp and cold above the peaks. He rose from his narrow sleeping mat, folded his blanket with the same care he had folded it 10,000 mornings before, and stepped outside into the winter air. The cold touched his face like a question. He breathed it in, felt it fill his chest, felt the way it sharpened his awareness. The snow on the ground was old snow, crusted and pale blue in the dim light. His footsteps made no sound. He walked slowly across the courtyard toward the well, his breath rising in soft clouds. The well was ancient, its stone rim worn smooth by countless hands. Daejo lowered the wooden bucket, heard the distant splash, felt the weight as he pulled it back up. The water was so cold it seemed to hum. He poured it into a basin, dipped his hands, and washed his face. The shock of it was a small awakening. He stood there for a moment, water dripping from his chin, and looked up at the sky. The stars were beginning to fade. The mountains around him were dark shapes against a sky that was just starting to soften, to turn from black to deep indigo. He could see the ridgeline to the east, jagged and still. Somewhere beyond it, the sun was preparing to rise. But not yet, not yet. Daejo returned to his room and lit a single candle. The flame wavered, found its center, grew steady. In that small pool of light, he knelt before a low wooden table and prepared tea. The movements were slow, deliberate. He heated the water in a small iron kettle over a brazier of coals. He listened to the sound of the water as it began to warm, first silent, then a whisper, then a low murmur that filled the room. When the water was ready, he poured it over the tea leaves in a small clay pot. The fragrance rose, earthy and green. He poured a cup, cradled it in both hands, and breathed in the steam. The warmth spread through his palms, into his wrists, up his arms. He took a sip. The taste was clean and faintly bitter, grounding. He sat there in the candlelight, the tea warming him from the inside, and thought about the year that was ending. It had been a quiet year, as most of his years were. There had been no great events, no dramatic changes. The seasons had turned. The snow had come and melted and come again. He had swept the paths, rung the bell, tended the small garden behind the temple. He had sat in meditation each morning and evening, watching his breath, watching his thoughts arise and dissolve like clouds. But even in the quietness, there had been things to carry. Small grievances, small attachments, a letter from a friend that had never arrived, a plum tree that had failed to bear fruit, a pain in his knee that had lingered through the autumn. These were not large burdens, but they were burdens nonetheless. And tonight, on this last night of the year, he felt the familiar instruction rising within him: let go. He finished his tea and set the cup down gently. Then he rose and walked to the temple's main hall. The hall was dim and cool, the wooden floor smooth beneath his feet. At the far end, beneath a simple altar, sat a bronze statue of the Buddha, serene and still. Daejo lit 3 sticks of incense and placed them in the ash-filled bowl before the statue. The smoke rose in thin, wavering lines. He knelt and bowed 3 times, his forehead touching the floor. Then he sat back on his heels and closed his eyes. In the silence, he began to name the things he had been holding, not aloud, but in the quiet of his heart. He named the disappointment of the unanswered letter. He named the frustration with his aging body. He named the small pride he had felt when a visitor praised the neatness of the temple grounds. He named the worry that he was not practicing deeply enough, that his years of solitude had not brought him closer to understanding. One by one, he named them, and one by one, he imagined releasing them, placing them on the altar like offerings, not with force, not with rejection, but with a kind of tenderness. These had been his companions, after all. They had walked with him through the year, and now it was time to let them rest. The incense burned slowly. The smoke drifted upward and disappeared into the shadows of the rafters. Daejo sat in the stillness, his breath rising and falling, and gradually he felt something shift. Not a dramatic shift, but a softening, a spaciousness. As if the room had grown slightly larger, as if the air had more room to move. When he opened his eyes, the hall was lighter. Dawn had arrived without announcement, slipping in through the high windows. The statue of the Buddha seemed to glow faintly in the pale light. Daejo stood slowly, his knees stiff, and walked to the window. Outside, the mountains were emerging from the dark, their peaks catching the first soft gold of the rising sun. He stood there and watched the light spread. It moved slowly, patiently, the way all true things move. It touched the highest ridges first, then descended, painting the slopes in shades of rose and amber. The snow glowed. The trees became visible, dark lines against the white. And Daejo felt, for a moment, that he was watching the year itself being released into the light. All that had been hidden in darkness was now seen, acknowledged, and blessed. He whispered a quiet thank you to the year that was ending, not for being easy, but for being what it was, for teaching him, again and again, the lesson he kept forgetting, that everything arises, abides for a time, and passes away. That clinging brings suffering. That release brings peace. When the sun had fully risen, Dejo returned to the courtyard. He picked up his broom, the same broom he had used for 30 years, its bristles worn soft and uneven. He began to sweep the stone path that led from the temple gate to the main hall. The motion was familiar, meditative. He swept slowly, mindfully, gathering the dust and fallen pine needles into small piles. As he swept, he noticed a single leaf that had somehow survived the winter, caught in a crack between two stones. It was brown and brittle, curled at the edges. He paused, knelt down, and gently freed it. He held it in his palm for a moment, studying its delicate veins, the way the light passed through it. Then he placed it on the pile with the others. This, he thought, is how we let go. Not with grand gestures, but with small acts of attention, sweeping the path, freeing the leaf, placing the cup back on the shelf. Each action a quiet release, a way of saying, I do not need to hold this anymore. He swept until the path was clean. Then he gathered the piles of debris and carried them to the edge of the forest, where he scattered them back to the earth. The wind picked up a few of the lighter pieces and carried them away, spinning them briefly in the air before they settled again among the roots and stones. Dejo stood at the forest's edge and looked back at the temple. It looked the same as it always had, simple, solid, at peace. But he felt different, lighter, as if he had set down a weight he hadn't fully realized he was carrying. He walked back slowly, his hands empty, his heart quiet. The sun was higher now, warming the air, melting the frost on the temple roof. Somewhere in the valley below, a bird called out, its voice clear and sudden. Dejo smiled. He did not know what the new year would bring. He did not need to know. All he needed was this: empty hands, an open heart, and the willingness to begin again. That night, as the last light faded from the sky, Dejo rang the temple bell. The sound rolled out across the mountains, deep and resonant, carrying far into the distance. He rang it 108 times, as was the tradition. Each strike a release, each vibration a prayer, and when the final note faded into silence, he stood in the darkness and felt the year fall away completely, like snow sliding from a branch. He returned to his small room, lay down on his mat, and closed his eyes. Outside, the stars reappeared, bright and cold. The mountains stood silent, and Dejo, with nothing left to carry, drifted into sleep. And somewhere not far from here, in a village cradled between two rivers, another story quietly unfolds. There was a woman named Seo Yun who lived in a village at the foot of the mountains, where the rivers met and the land was soft and fertile. She was a weaver, and her small house was filled with looms and spindles, baskets of wool, bolts of cloth in shades of cream and indigo and rust. She had lived in this house all her life, first as a child with her parents, then alone after they passed, and finally with her daughter, who had recently married and moved to a town 2 days' journey away. The house felt different now, quieter, larger, somehow, though nothing had changed. The looms were still in the same places. The baskets of wool still sat beneath the window, but the air held a new quality of stillness, a kind of echo. On the last day of the year, Seo Yun woke to the sound of rain. It was a soft rain, steady and patient, the kind that would last all day. She lay in her bed for a moment, listening to it tap against the roof, against the leaves of the persimmon tree outside her window. The sound was soothing, rhythmic, like a lullaby. She rose and dressed slowly, wrapping herself in a thick shawl her daughter had woven for her last winter. The wool was soft and warm, dyed a deep plum color. She ran her fingers over it, feeling the texture, the slight irregularities in the weave that told her it had been made by hand, by someone who cared. She moved to the kitchen and built a small fire in the stove. The wood was dry and caught quickly, the flames licking upward with a soft crackling sound. She filled a kettle with water from the clay jar by the door and set it on the stove to heat. While she waited, she stood at the window and looked out at the rain. The village was quiet. The street outside was empty, the cobblestones dark and slick with water. Across the way, she could see smoke rising from the chimney of the baker's house, a thin gray line dissolving into the low clouds. The persimmon tree in her yard was bare now, its branches black and dripping. A few withered fruits still clung to the highest branches, too high to reach, slowly turning to leather in the winter air. The kettle began to steam. Seo-yoon turned and prepared a simple breakfast rice porridge with a bit of salted radish, a cup of barley tea. She ate slowly, sitting at the low table by the window, watching the rain. The porridge was warm and plain, exactly what she needed. She chewed each mouthful carefully, tasting the grain, the salt, the faint nuttiness of the barley tea. When she finished, she washed her bowl and cup and set them on the wooden rack to dry. Then she stood for a moment in the center of the room, looking around. The house felt full of presence, not the presence of people, but the presence of all the years she had lived here. Every object held a memory. The crack in the wall by the door where her daughter had once thrown a ball too hard. The worn spot on the floor in front of the loom where she had stood for decades. The shelf where her mother's teapot still sat, dusty and unused. She had been thinking, lately, about what it means to let go. Not of the house, not of the objects themselves, but of the stories she had been telling herself about them. The story that she was still the mother of a small child who needed her. The story that her parents might somehow return. The story that her life was supposed to look different than it did. She walked to the loom and ran her hand over the cloth she had been weaving. It was a simple pattern, stripes of cream and gray, intended for a blanket. The work was half finished, the warp threads stretched taut, the shuttle resting in the shed. She had started it in the autumn, thinking she would finish it before the new year and send it to her daughter as a gift. But the work had been slow. Her hands were not as quick as they once were, and her eyes tired more easily. She sat down at the loom and picked up the shuttle. The wood was smooth and familiar in her palm, worn to a perfect fit by years of use. She passed it through the warp, pulled the beater forward, and watched the new thread settle into place. The motion was automatic, meditative. Pass, pull, pass, pull. The rhythm was steady, calming. As she wove, she let her mind wander. She thought about her daughter, who was building a new life in a new town. She thought about her parents, who had taught her this craft, who had sat at this very loom and created beauty from simple thread. She thought about all the cloth she had woven over the years, all the blankets and scarves and garments that had passed through her hands and into the world, warming strangers, covering sleeping children, wrapping gifts. She realized, as the shuttle moved back and forth, that she had been holding on to an old image of herself, the image of the woman who was needed, whose work was essential, whose presence mattered in a tangible, daily way. But that woman was changing. Her daughter no longer needed her in the same way. The village had other weavers now, younger ones with faster hands, and she, Seo Yun was becoming something else, something quieter, more interior, not less valuable, but different. She stopped weaving and looked at the cloth. It was beautiful, even unfinished. The stripes were even, the tension perfect. But she realized, with a sudden clarity, that she did not need to finish it today. She did not need to finish it at all, not if the joy was gone from the work. She could let it be what it was, a half-woven blanket, a record of her intentions, a moment in time. She set the shuttle down gently and stood. Her knees ached a little, stiff from sitting. She walked to the window again and looked out. The rain had softened to a drizzle. The light was gray and diffuse, without shadows. The world looked quiet, washed clean. She decided then to spend the rest of the day releasing what she no longer needed, not by throwing things away, but by acknowledging them, honoring them, and letting them rest. She walked through the house slowly, room by room, touching objects, remembering, and then letting the memories settle. She picked up her mother's teapot, wiped the dust from its surface, and placed it back on the shelf. She did not need to use it to honor her mother. Her mother was not in the teapot. She folded the blankets in the chest by the door, smoothing them with her hands, and realized she did not need to keep all of them. Some could be given away, could warm other homes. She looked at the stack of letters from her daughter, tied with a ribbon, and understood that she did not need to reread them to feel her daughter's love. The love was already there, woven into the fabric of her days. By late afternoon, the house felt different, lighter, somehow, not emptier, but more spacious, as if the air had more room to move, as if the walls had exhaled. Seo Yun made herself a simple dinner soup with vegetables and tofu, a small bowl of rice. She ate by candlelight, the rain still falling softly outside. The soup was hot and savory, the tofu silky on her tongue. She ate slowly, gratefully, tasting each spoonful. After dinner, she sat by the window and watched the darkness deepen. The village lights began to appear, small golden points in the distance. She thought about the new year that was coming, only hours away now. She did not know what it would bring. Perhaps her daughter would visit. Perhaps she would weave new cloth, or perhaps she would find other ways to spend her time. Perhaps her hands would grow stiffer, or perhaps they would stay strong. It did not matter. What mattered was this: she was here, now, alive, breathing, capable of letting go. She whispered a quiet blessing to the old year. Thank you for what you gave. Thank you for what you took away. Thank you for teaching me, again, that I am not what I hold, but what I release. When the night was fully dark, she prepared for bed. She washed her face in cool water, changed into her sleeping clothes, and lay down on her mat. The rain had stopped. The silence was deep and complete. She closed her eyes and felt her body soften into the floor, felt the weight of the day dissolve. She did not know what she was becoming, but she trusted the process, the way she trusted the loom to hold the threads, the way she trusted the rain to fall and the sun to rise. And as she drifted towards sleep, she felt a deep, quiet peace, the kind that comes only from letting go. And there, beneath the same sky, in a forest where the trees grow tall and silent, another quiet tale waits to be told. There was a man named Jin who lived alone in a hut at the edge of a great forest, where the trees were ancient and the paths were few. He had been a scholar once, in a city far away, a man of books and debates and late-night conversations about the nature of truth. But 10 years ago, after a great loss he did not speak of, he had walked away from that life and found this place, this simple hut with its moss-covered roof and its single room. He lived simply. He gathered firewood, drew water from a nearby stream, grew a small garden of radishes and greens. He read, sometimes the few books he had brought with him, their pages soft and yellowed, but mostly he sat. He sat in the doorway of his hut and watched the forest. He sat by the stream and listened to the water. He sat in the garden and felt the sun on his face. On the last day of the year, Jin woke to find the forest covered in a thin layer of frost. The world was silver and still, every branch and leaf outlined in white. The air was sharp and cold, and his breath rose in soft clouds. He stood in the doorway, wrapped in a wool blanket, and looked out at the transformed landscape. The frost was delicate, temporary. By midday, it would be gone, melted by the sun. But for now, it held everything in a kind of suspension, a stillness so complete it felt like the forest was holding its breath. Jin stepped outside, his bare feet pressing into the cold earth. The shock of it traveled up his legs, waking him fully. He walked to the stream, his footsteps crunching softly on the frosted ground. The stream was still running, its surface broken by small eddies and ripples. He knelt and cupped his hands, scooped the icy water, and splashed it on his face. The cold was fierce, clarifying. He sat back on his heels and looked at the water. It was clear and quick, tumbling over smooth stones, catching the early light. He had spent many hours by this stream, watching it flow, learning its rhythms. In spring, it ran high and fast, fed by snowmelt. In summer, it slowed to a gentle trickle. In autumn, leaves drifted on its surface like small boats. And now, in winter, it was cold and bright, insistent. He realized, as he sat there, that the stream had taught him something essential. Nothing stays. Everything flows. The water he was looking at now was not the same water he had looked at yesterday. It had come from somewhere upstream, from rain or snow or underground springs, and it was moving on, downstream, toward the valley, toward the river, toward the sea. It did not cling to the stones. It did not resist the current. It simply moved endlessly in the direction it was called. Jin stood and walked back to his hut. Inside, he built a small fire in the stone hearth. The wood was dry and caught quickly, and soon the room was filled with warmth and the soft scent of smoke. He made tea, brewing it slowly, and sat cross-legged on his mat, the cup warming his hands. He had been thinking, lately, about the things he still carried from his old life. Not physical things, he had left almost everything behind, but the invisible weights, the regrets, the questions, the sense that he should have done something differently, should have been wiser, kinder, more present. He thought about the person he had lost, whose face he could still see clearly when he closed his eyes. He thought about the words he had said and the words he had not said. He thought about the years of silence that had followed, the way he had walked into the forest as if walking into exile. But now, sitting in the warmth of the fire, he wondered if it was time to release even this, not to forget, but to stop carrying it as a burden, to let it be what it was, a part of his story, a teacher, a wound that had slowly become a scar. He set his tea down and reached for a small wooden box that sat on a shelf by the window. Inside the box were a few letters, brittle with age, and a single photograph, faded and creased. He had not opened the box in years. He lifted the lid slowly and looked at the contents. The photograph showed two people standing in a garden, smiling, young. He recognized himself, barely. The man in the photograph had smooth skin, bright eyes, a kind of eagerness that Jin no longer felt. The other person, he paused, let himself look fully, was smiling too, their face open and unguarded. He held the photograph for a long time, feeling the weight of memory. Then, gently, he placed it back in the box. He did not need to destroy it. He did not need to forget. He only needed to let it rest, to stop revisiting it as if it held some answer he had not yet found. He closed the box and set it back on the shelf. Then he stood and walked outside again. The sun was higher now, and the frost was beginning to melt. Tiny droplets of water clung to the edges of leaves, catching the light like jewels. The forest was waking, shifting from silver to green, from stillness to subtle motion. Jin walked into the forest, following a narrow path that wound between the trees. The path was unmarked, known only to him, and it led to a small clearing where a single stone sat in the center, flat and gray and worn smooth by weather. He had come to this clearing many times over the years. It was his place of reflection, his outdoor temple. He sat down on the stone, cross-legged, his hands resting on his knees. The forest around him was quiet except for the occasional drip of melting frost, the distant call of a bird. He closed his eyes and began to breathe. Slow, deep breaths, counting them silently. 1, 2, 3, 4. In, out, in, out. He let his thoughts come, watched them arise, watched them dissolve. He did not try to push them away. He simply noted them, the way one might note clouds passing across the sky. A thought of the past, a thought of regret, a thought of the person he had been, a thought of the person he was now. Each one arose, lingered, and faded. And with each breath, he felt something loosening, some tight knot in his chest, slowly unwinding. He sat for a long time. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, warming his face. The frost melted completely, the ground turning dark and damp. A squirrel appeared at the edge of the clearing, paused, watched him with bright eyes, then scampered away. When Jin finally opened his eyes, the light had changed. It was late morning now, the shadows shorter, the world sharper. He felt different, not transformed, but shifted slightly, as if he had set down a pack he had been carrying for miles and only now realized how heavy it had been. He stood and walked back to the hut. On the way, he stopped by a small grove of bamboo. The stalks were tall and straight, their leaves whispering in the breeze. He reached out and touched one of the stalks, felt its smooth surface, its cool strength. Bamboo, he thought, bends in the wind. It does not resist, it does not break, it simply moves and then returns. Back at the hut, he spent the afternoon in quiet tasks. He chopped wood, stacked it neatly by the door. He swept the floor of the hut, gathered the dust and ash and carried it outside. He mended a tear in his blanket, his stitches slow and careful. Each task was simple, grounding. Each task was a way of being present, of letting the old year pass without clinging to it. As the sun began to set, Jin sat in the doorway and watched the light fade from the sky. The forest grew dim, the trees becoming dark silhouettes against the deepening blue. The first stars appeared, faint and tentative. He wrapped the blanket around his shoulders and felt the cold air settle. He thought about the new year that was coming. He had no plans, no resolutions. He would wake tomorrow and do what he always did, gather wood, draw water, sit by the stream. But he would do it with empty hands. He would do it without the weight of what should have been or what might have been. He would do it simply, fully, in the only moment that ever truly existed. This one. He whispered a quiet thank you to the year that was ending. Thank you for the silence. Thank you for the lessons. Thank you for bringing me here, to this forest, to this life I did not plan but have come to love. When the stars were bright and the night was full, he went inside and lay down on his mat. The fire had burned down to embers, glowing softly in the darkness. He pulled the blanket over himself and closed his eyes. Outside, the forest was alive with small sounds: the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft sigh of wind through the branches. Jin felt the day settle around him, felt his body relax into the floor, and as he drifted toward sleep, he thought of the stream, still flowing in the darkness, carrying everything away, always moving, never holding on. And in a valley where the mountains cradle a quiet village, another story unfolds beneath the fading year. There was a potter named Min who lived in a village where the clay was red and rich, drawn from the riverbanks where the water ran slow and brown. She had learned her craft from her grandmother, who had learned it from her grandmother before her. And her hands knew the wheel the way birds know flight, without thought, without hesitation, only motion and memory. Her workshop stood at the edge of the village, a small building with wide doors that opened to the south, letting in the light. Inside, shelves lined the walls, holding bowls and cups and vases in various stages of completion. Some were still raw, the clay soft and gray. Others had been fired once, their surfaces hard but unglazed. And a few sat waiting, finished and perfect, ready to be sold or given away. On the last day of the year, Min woke before dawn and walked to her workshop in the darkness. The air was cold and still, the village silent around her. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, lighting a single oil lamp that cast a warm, flickering glow across the space. She had been thinking for weeks now about a particular set of bowls she had made in the spring. There were 6 of them, identical in size and shape, thrown on the wheel with careful precision. She had glazed them in a soft celadon green, fired them in her kiln, and then set them on the highest shelf, waiting for the right buyer, the right moment. But the moment had never come. The bowls sat untouched, gathering dust, and now, looking at them in the lamplight, Min realized why she had been unable to sell them. They were too perfect, too controlled. She had made them with her skill, with her knowledge, but not with her heart. They were beautiful, but they were empty. She climbed the small ladder and lifted the bowls down, one by one, setting them on her work table. In the lamplight, they gleamed softly, their surfaces smooth and flawless. She ran her fingers over them, feeling the cool glaze, the precise curve of the rim. Anyone else would have called them masterpieces, but Min knew better. She sat down at the table and looked at the bowls. She thought about the year that was ending, about all the things she had made and unmade, all the pots that had cracked in the kiln, all the glazes that had run or bubbled or turned the wrong color. She thought about the moments of frustration, the days when her hands would not cooperate, when the clay seemed to have a will of its own. And she realized that those were the moments when she had been most alive. Not when everything went perfectly, but when she had to adapt, to let go of her expectations, to trust the process rather than control it. She picked up one of the bowls and held it in both hands. Then, with a sudden clarity, she turned and walked to the back of the workshop, where a large stone mortar sat in the corner. She lifted the bowl high and brought it down sharply against the mortar's edge. The bowl shattered. Pieces of celadon green scattered across the floor, glinting in the lamplight. The sound was sharp and final, like a bell being struck once and then going silent. Min stood there, breathing, feeling the shock of what she had just done. Then she smiled, not a sad smile, but a smile of release. She returned to the table and, one by one, she shattered the remaining bowls. Each one broke differently. Some split cleanly in half. Others exploded into dozens of small shards. The sound filled the workshop, a strange music of endings. When all 6 bowls were destroyed, Min knelt on the floor and gathered the pieces. She did not throw them away. Instead, she placed them carefully in a wooden box, her fingers selecting the most interesting fragments, a curve of rim, a piece with a particularly beautiful glaze run, a shard that caught the light just so. She had heard of the Japanese practice of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, the cracks celebrated rather than hidden. She did not have gold, but she had something else, the willingness to begin again, to take what was broken and make it into something new. She set the box aside and turned to her wheel. The wheel was old, made of wood and stone, its surface worn smooth by decades of use. She sat down on her stool, scooped a handful of fresh clay from the bucket beside her, and centered it on the wheel. The clay was cold and damp, heavy in her hands. She pressed her foot to the pedal and the wheel began to turn, slow at first, then faster. She wet her hands in the bowl of water beside her and placed them on the spinning clay. The first touch was always a conversation. The clay spoke to her through her palms, told her its texture, its moisture, its willingness to move. She pressed down gently, felt the clay rise between her fingers, then fall again. She opened the center, creating a hollow, then pulled the walls upward, thinning them, shaping them. She was not trying to make anything in particular. She was simply following the clay, letting it guide her. The bowl that emerged was uneven, asymmetrical. The rim wavered, dipping in one place, rising in another. The walls were thicker at the base, thinner at the top. It was not perfect. It was alive. When she was satisfied, she cut the bowl from the wheel with a wire and set it on a board to dry. Then she threw another and another. She worked through the morning, bowl after bowl, each one different, each one imperfect, each one true. The sun rose, filling the workshop with pale winter light. Min paused to drink water, to stretch her back, to look at the row of bowls drying on the shelf. They were nothing like the perfect celadon bowls she had destroyed. They were rough, honest, full of character. They looked like they had been made by human hands, for human use. She realized, as she looked at them, that this was what she had been trying to learn all year. Not how to make perfect things, but how to make real things. Not how to control the clay, but how to collaborate with it. Not how to avoid mistakes, but how to embrace them as part of the beauty. By midday, she had thrown a dozen bowls. Her hands were tired, her back ached, but she felt lighter than she had in months. She cleaned her wheel, washed her tools, and sat down on the step outside her workshop to rest. The village was awake now. She could hear the sounds of daily life, children calling to each other, the clang of a pot, the rhythmic thud of someone chopping wood. The air smelled of smoke and cooking rice. A dog trotted past, paused to sniff at her feet, then continued on. Min closed her eyes and tilted her face to the sun. The warmth soaked into her skin, into her bones. She thought about the new year that was coming, only hours away now. She did not know what it would bring. Perhaps her work would sell, perhaps it would not. Perhaps she would make beautiful things, perhaps she would make ugly things. It did not matter. What mattered was that she would keep making, keep learning, keep letting go. She stood and walked back inside. She spent the afternoon preparing her kiln for the next firing, stacking wood, checking the shelves. When the light began to fade, she locked the workshop and walked home through the village, her hands clay-stained, her heart quiet. That night, she ate a simple meal, soup and bread, and then sat by her window, watching the stars appear. The year was ending. Tomorrow it would begin again, and she would meet it with empty hands, ready to be filled, ready to shape, ready to let go. And there, where the sea meets the shore and the tide marks time, another gentle story rises. There was a man named Quan who lived in a small coastal town where the houses were built on stilts above the water and the boats rocked gently in the harbor. He had been a fisherman all his life, like his father and his father's father, going out before dawn and returning with the afternoon tide, his nets full of silver fish. But 2 years ago, an injury to his shoulder had ended his fishing days. The pain was constant, a dull ache that sharpened with certain movements. He could no longer haul the heavy nets, could no longer raise the sail. And so he had sold his boat to a younger man and taken up a different kind of work, mending nets for other fishermen. He worked on the beach, sitting on a low stool beneath a canvas shade, his fingers moving through the tangled mesh, finding the tiers, tying the knots. It was quiet work, solitary work, and at first it had felt like a defeat. But over time, he had come to appreciate it. There was a kind of meditation in the repetition, in the careful attention required to repair what was broken. On the last day of the year, Quan woke to the sound of waves. The tide was high, the water lapping against the pilings beneath his house. He rose and dressed, then walked down the wooden steps to the beach. The sand was cool and damp beneath his feet, littered with shells and seaweed from the night's tide. The sky was pale, the sun not yet risen. The horizon was a soft line where the gray sea met the gray sky, barely distinguishable. A few early birds circled overhead, their cries thin and distant. Quan walked along the beach, his hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the sand. He was looking for something, though he could not have said what. A sign, perhaps, a message from the sea. He found it near the tide line, a piece of driftwood, smooth and gray, shaped by years of salt and current. It was about as long as his forearm, curved slightly, one end thick and the other tapered. He picked it up, felt its weight, its texture. The wood was hard and dense, waterlogged but beautiful. He carried it back to his work spot and sat down on his stool. He set the driftwood beside him and picked up the net he had been mending the day before. It belonged to a young fisherman named Duke, whose boat was small but whose catch was often good. The net had a large tear near the bottom, several feet of mesh completely destroyed. Quan threaded his needle with new twine and began to work. The motion was familiar, automatic. Loop, pull, knot. Loop, pull, knot. The mesh slowly rebuilt itself under his hands, row by row, square by square. He worked slowly, not because he had to, but because there was no rush. The net would be ready when it was ready. As he worked, he thought about the year that was ending. It had been a difficult year in some ways. His shoulder had not improved. His daughter had moved to the city for work, and he saw her rarely. His wife had been ill for several months, though she was better now. There had been storms that damaged the harbor, days when the boats could not go out, weeks when the catch was poor. But there had been good things too. His wife's recovery, the first smile from his new grandson, whom he had met only once, the quiet satisfaction of finishing a particularly difficult net repair, the way the light looked on the water at certain times of day. He realized, as his fingers moved through the mesh, that he had been holding on to the difficult things more tightly than the good things. The pain in his shoulder had become a constant companion, a thing he noticed more than the absence of pain elsewhere in his body. The distance from his daughter had become a source of grief, overshadowing the gratitude he felt for her safety and success. He paused in his work and looked out at the sea. The sun was rising now, a pale disk emerging from the horizon, painting the water with streaks of gold. The waves rolled in, steady and patient, each one erasing the marks left by the one before. The sea, he thought, does not hold on. It gives and it takes. It brings the tide in and draws it out again. It carries things away and brings new things to shore. It does not cling. He looked down at the net in his hands. The tier was half repaired now, the new mesh bright against the old. He thought about all the nets he had mended over the past 2 years, all the hours he had spent sitting on this beach, tying knots. Each net had been damaged in a different way. Some had small tears, easily fixed. Others had large sections completely destroyed, requiring hours of work. But all of them, in the end, could be repaired. All of them could be made whole again, or whole enough. And perhaps, he thought, that was the lesson. Not that things should never break, but that breaking was part of the cycle. Nets tore, boats leaked, bodies aged, seasons changed. And the work was not to prevent the breaking, but to learn how to mend, how to adapt, how to continue. He picked up the piece of driftwood he had found earlier and turned it over in his hands. He could see the grain of the wood, the way it had been shaped by water and time. It had once been part of a tree, rooted in the earth, reaching toward the sky. Then it had fallen or been cut, had found its way to the sea, had tumbled in the currents for years until it was no longer recognizable as what it once was. But it was still beautiful, perhaps more beautiful for the transformation. Quan set the driftwood down and returned to the net. He worked through the morning, stopping occasionally to stretch his back, to drink water, to watch the boats leave the harbor. The fishermen waved to him as they passed, and he waved back. He knew all of them, had fished with many of them when he was younger. He did not envy them. He had had his time on the water. This was his time on the shore. By noon, the net was finished. He held it up, checking his work, making sure the mesh was even, the knots secure. It looked good. Duck would be pleased. Quan folded the net carefully and set it aside for pickup. Then he sat for a while, doing nothing, just watching the sea, feeling the breeze on his face, listening to the sounds of the town behind him, the creak of boats, the call of vendors, the laughter of children. He thought about the new year that was coming. He did not know what it would bring. Perhaps his shoulder would worsen. Perhaps his daughter would visit. Perhaps there would be good fishing, or perhaps there would be storms. He could not control any of it. He could only show up, day after day, and do the work in front of him, mend the nets, watch the sea, let go of what he could not hold. As the sun began its descent, Quan stood and gathered his things. He picked up the piece of driftwood and carried it home with him. He did not know what he would do with it, perhaps carve it into something, or perhaps just set it on a shelf and let it be a reminder that everything is shaped by time and current. That letting go is not loss, but transformation. That night, he sat with his wife by the window, watching the lights of the boats in the harbor, the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. They did not talk much. They simply sat together, her hand in his, the sound of the waves a constant murmur beneath the silence. And when the year finally turned, slipping from old to new in the space of a single breath, Quan felt a quiet gratitude, not for what he had accomplished, but for what he had released, not for what he had gained, but for what he had learned to let go. And far from here, where the hills roll gently and the earth is soft, one last story settles into place. There was a monk named Haewon who lived in a monastery on a hillside, where the buildings were made of stone and the courtyards were raked with gravel. She had taken her vows 35 years ago, when she was barely 20, and had spent her life in study and practice, seeking to understand the nature of suffering and the path to its end. She was old now, her hair gray, her face lined. Her body moved more slowly than it once had, her knees stiff, her back often sore. But her mind was clear, sharp as ever, and her practice had deepened with the years. On the last day of the year, Haewon woke in her small room and lay still for a moment, listening to the silence. The monastery was quiet, the other monks and nuns still sleeping. Outside, the world was dark, the stars fading as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. She rose and dressed in her simple robes, then walked to the meditation hall. The hall was large and empty, the wooden floor polished smooth by decades of feet. At the far end, a statue of the Buddha sat in stillness, surrounded by candles that had burned down to stubs. Haewon lit a fresh candle and placed it on the altar. Then she took her cushion from the stack by the wall and set it in the center of the hall. She sat down, adjusted her posture, and closed her eyes. The breath came and went, in, out, in, out. She counted silently to 10, then began again. 1, 2, 3, 4. The breath was her anchor, her home. When her mind wandered, she noticed, and gently brought her attention back. No judgment, no frustration, just the simple act of returning. She sat for an hour, maybe more. Time lost its meaning in the stillness. There was only the breath, the body, the vast spaciousness of awareness. When she opened her eyes, the hall was lighter. Dawn had arrived, soft and gray. Haewon stood slowly, her knees creaking, and walked to the window. Outside, the hills were emerging from the darkness, their rounded shapes becoming visible against the pale sky. She thought about the year that was ending. It had been a year like any other, and yet unlike any other. The seasons had turned. She had sat in meditation, worked in the garden, studied the sutras, shared meals with the community. She had experienced moments of insight and moments of confusion, moments of peace and moments of restlessness. And through it all, she had practiced letting go of the idea that she should be somewhere other than where she was, letting go of the belief that enlightenment was something to be achieved rather than something to be recognized, letting go of the attachment to comfort, to certainty, to control. She had learned over the years that letting go was not a single act but a continuous practice. It was not something you did once and then were finished. It was something you did again and again, moment by moment, breath by breath. After the morning meditation, Haewon joined the other monastics for breakfast. They ate in silence, as was the custom, each person attending fully to the simple meal of rice, porridge, and pickled vegetables. Haewon chewed slowly, tasting each mouthful, feeling the texture, the warmth, the nourishment entering her body. When the meal was finished, She helped clear the bowls and wash the dishes. Then she put on her work clothes and went to the garden. The garden was her responsibility, had been for many years. It was a small plot behind the kitchen where they grew vegetables for the community. In summer, it was full of live tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, greens. But now, in winter, it was mostly bare, the soil turned and resting. Hei-wan stood at the edge of the garden and looked at the empty beds. In a few weeks, she would begin to prepare for spring planting. But today, on this last day of the year, there was nothing to plant, nothing to harvest, only the earth, resting. She knelt and placed her hand on the soil. It was cold, damp from recent rain. She could feel its aliveness, the way it held the memory of all the plants that had grown here, all the seeds that had been sown and harvested over the years. She thought about the cycle of growth and decay, the way everything returned to the earth. The vegetables that had fed them through the summer were gone now, composted. Their nutrients returned to the soil. And in spring, new seeds would be planted, would draw on those nutrients, would grow into new plants. Nothing was lost. Everything was transformed. This, she thought, is what it means to let go. Not to discard, but to release back into the cycle. To trust that what falls away is not wasted but becomes the ground for what comes next. She stood and brushed the soil from her hands. Then she walked to the far corner of the garden, where a small stone bench sat beneath a bare plum tree. She had placed this bench here years ago, a spot for resting, for reflection. She sat on the bench and looked up at the tree. Its branches were dark and empty, stretched against the gray sky like calligraphy. In a few months, it would bloom, covering itself in delicate white flowers that lasted only a few days before falling. The beauty was fleeting, but it returned every year, reliable as breath. Hei-wan closed her eyes and felt the cool air on her face. She thought about all the people she had known who were no longer here. Teachers who had died, friends who had left the monastery, family members she had said goodbye to when she took her vows. Each loss had been painful, a tearing, but each loss had also taught her something essential, that love does not require possession, that connection can exist even in absence, that letting go does not mean forgetting. She sat for a long time, the bench hard beneath her, the air growing colder as the day wore on. She did not move, she simply breathed and remembered and released. When the light began to fade, she stood and walked back to her room. She lit a candle and sat at her small desk. On the desk was a brush, an inkstone, and a piece of paper. She had been thinking about writing something, a reflection on the year, but now that the moment had come, she found she had nothing to say. Or perhaps, she thought, the truest reflection was silence. She picked up the brush anyway, wet it with ink, and held it above the paper. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, with a single stroke, she painted a circle, an enso, a symbol of emptiness, of completeness, of the void that contains all things. The circle was not perfect. The line wavered slightly, thick in some places, thin in others. Where the brush had started and where it ended did not quite meet, leaving a small gap. Hei-wan looked at the circle and smiled. It was exactly right. Not perfect, but complete. Whole in its imperfection, open in its closure. She set the brush down and looked at the painting. This, she thought, is the year that is ending. Imperfect, incomplete, but beautiful nonetheless. And the gap, the opening, that is where the new year will enter. That night, The community gathered in the meditation hall for a special sitting to mark the turning of the year. They sat in rows, silent and still, while outside the world grew dark and the stars appeared. No one spoke, no one moved. There was only the breath, the stillness, the vast quiet of minds at rest. At midnight, the monastery bell rang 108 times, as was the tradition. Each strike echoed through the hills, carrying far into the darkness. Hei-wan listened to each one, counting silently, feeling each vibration as it arose and faded. With each strike, she released something, a regret, a hope, an attachment. She did not name them specifically. She simply let them go, one by one, until the bell had rung its final note and the silence returned, deeper than before. When the sitting ended, Hei-wan returned to her room. She extinguished the candle and lay down on her mat. The monastery was utterly quiet. The year was done. She closed her eyes and felt her body soften into sleep, and in the darkness she whispered a quiet vow. Not for the new year. She had learned that vows made in anticipation often carried hidden attachments, but for this moment and the next and the next. To meet what comes with open hands, to hold what needs holding and release what needs releasing, to trust the cycle, the flow, the endless turning of seasons and years. To remember that she was not separate from this process, but part of it, a wave in the ocean, returning home. And as sleep took her, she felt a deep, abiding peace, not because everything was resolved, but because everything was exactly as it needed to be, imperfect, incomplete, and whole. And now, dear listener, we come to the close. 6 stories, 6 ways of releasing what the year has carried. The monk in the mountain temple, the weaver in her quiet house, the scholar in the forest, the potter breaking her perfect bowls, the fisherman mending nets by the sea, the old nun painting circles, each one letting go in their own way. Not with force, not with drama, but with gentleness, with attention, with trust. And perhaps you too have found something to release tonight. Some small weight you did not know you were carrying, some story you have been telling yourself that is ready to be laid down. You do not need to know what comes next. The new year will arrive whether you are ready or not. It will bring what it brings. Your only task is this: to rest now, to soften, to let the day dissolve into sleep. Your breath is slowing, your body is heavy. The stories have done their work, and now there is nothing left to do but drift. The year is ending. You are safe. You are held. And in the morning, when you wake, you will begin again. But for now, let go, let go, let go. Sleep well.